Alrighty, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Horror Mine, where we talk about mysteries, thrillers, and horror movies. My name is Vic Shy, and this week we're talking about the newly released German Netflix original horror film, Blood Red Sky. The film tells the story of Nadia, a widow and mother who also turns out to be a vampire. When the airplane she is on gets hijacked by a group of terrorists, she must unleash her terrifying secret to protect her son and everyone on board. It isn't long before the entire plane becomes infested with blood-sucking vampires. How the hell did things get to this point? I'll be explaining the events that take place in this bloody amazing vampire film, but before I do, I would truly appreciate it if you clicked the like button on this video, as I put in a lot of time and effort to make these videos, and it lets me know that you all are enjoying the content. But without further ado, sit back and relax and join me as we travel in a vampire-infested plane in Blood Red Sky. Our movie begins with a very intense scene located on a Scottish military airfield. Several military personnel are preparing for the emergency landing of aircraft Transatlantic 473, an airplane that was hijacked by a group of terrorists. They are giving landing instructions to an unknown person on board, as the pilot and co-pilot are presumed dead. The operation is being led by Colonel Alan Drummond, who attempts to make contact with personnel on board. He makes contact with a man in the cockpit who appears to have one of his hands amputated, saying that he isn't a terrorist and can explain everything. A little boy holding a teddy bear makes his way off the plane and is rescued by the military. Colonel Drummond believes that there are several passengers on the plane still being held hostage by the group of terrorists who plan to detonate the plane. However, they are unaware that the actual threat is a group of blood-sucking vampires waiting until darkness to unleash havoc. How the hell did a commercial airline flight get infested with a swarm of blood-sucking vampires? Hey, why don't we ask this traumatized little boy to recount the scariest moment of his life all over again and find out? The rest of the film is a flashback that recounts the events that took place before the film's intro. The little boy's name is Elias and his mother is Nadia. We see Nadia putting on a wig in the mirror while a TV broadcast about the rising surge in the stock market led by airline stocks plays in the background. We see Elias head to the airport alone to check in their luggage. Back at the hotel, we see Nadia speaking to an American doctor on the phone. It is not yet revealed at this point in the film, but Nadia is infected with vampirism. She and Elias are taking a flight to America so she can undergo a bone marrow transplant, something she hopes will replace the vampire blood in her body and turn her back into a normal human being. Elias had to check in their bags alone, as Nadia can't travel during the daytime because, you know, the sun and all. She reunites with him when the sun goes down and gets stopped at the security check because of her medication. In the bathroom, Nadia consumes a small amount of blood and injects herself with a drug called cytarabine. It is a drug commonly used to treat cancer, but in her case, she is using it to suppress her vampirism. Elias meets a man named Farid, who is traveling to the US for a science convention. He impresses Farid with his knowledge and also breaks all sorts of HIPAA laws by telling him about his mother's illness. They board the plane and we meet some of the most typical airplane passengers ever. The douchebag that hogs all the cargo space, the old couple, and the guy that flirts with the flight attendants. We see two men looking at each other seeming pretty suspicious and also meet a very flamboyant flight attendant named Robert. We see Nadia's vampirism starting to take a toll on her. Trying to suppress her illness and the lack of blood intake is making her extremely weak and disoriented. In a flashback, we see a happy memory of her and her husband Nikolai before she became infected. The couple along with baby Elias are driving home in the snow when their car suddenly breaks down. Nikolai decides to do the most horror movie thing ever and go look for help on his own, leaving his wife and baby behind in the middle of nowhere. What's the worst that can happen? Right? Back on the plane, one of the passengers starts to become rowdy and physical with Robert. One of the air marshals detains the man and takes him behind the curtain. Another marshal follows behind them and gets shanked in the freaking neck by Robert. It is revealed that Robert and the passenger Carl are terrorists and faked a disturbance to draw out the air marshals and kill them. Robert, aka 8-Ball, tells another terrorist named Curtis the seat number of the 3rd air marshal, and he proceeds to murder her in straight up Assassin's Creed fashion. 8-Ball murders the remaining air marshal by stabbing him multiple times. Nadia's heightened senses alert her that something is wrong, as she can hear the stabbing sounds and can also smell his blood. Two more terrorists reveal themselves, explosive expert Yuri and leader Berg, who holds everyone at gunpoint and orders them to the back of the plane. He heads to the cockpit and it is revealed that the co-pilot, Bastian, is also part of the terrorist group and has murdered the pilot. You can't trust anybody nowadays. Yuri uses an ultraviolet flashlight to reveal hidden wording on the ground and proceeds to shut off the plane's ACARS, the system that transmits digital messages from the plane to the ground. 8-Ball approaches Nadia covered in blood and her urges cause her to stare at him.
What? Cut it out, 8-Ball.
Elias says that they should hide in the cargo hold and proceeds to make a run for it. Nadia runs after him and is suddenly shot by 8-Ball. 8-Ball is absolutely crazy and his over-the-top antics don't sit well with the other terrorists, because I guess even terrorists hijacking a plane have standards.
I need you to stay here. Can you do that? Promise me.
Yes, Mr. Terrorist, sir. Your friend just killed my mom, but I'll definitely do what you ask me to. While she lays on the ground bleeding, we see the continuation of Nadia's previous flashback. She follows Nikolai's tracks to an abandoned house in the middle of the woods. She sees a trail of blood and decides that it's a good idea to follow it while carrying her 1-year-old baby. She is suddenly ambushed by a vampire and retreats to the basement where she finds Nikolai's lifeless body. The vampire tries to get into the basement from the outside, but she manages to fight him off until the sunlight causes him to retreat. This is the moment that Nadia becomes infected as we see a bite mark on her right hand. Back on the plane, we see an injured but still living Nadia retreating to the plane's cargo hold. Farid and 2 other Muslim passengers are taken to the front of the plane and forced to read a message to the government written by the terrorists, where Farid gets one of the other passengers killed for trying to be a smartass. Down in the cargo hold, Yuri begins to make a homemade bomb. A weakened Nadia sacrifices a poor little puppy and drinks its blood to regain her strength. This catches the attention of Yuri, who gets thrown around and ultimately killed by Nadia. We see that drinking blood helps her wounds heal just as fast as the Wolverine and gives her enhanced speed and strength. Nadia discovers that the hijackers plan to parachute off the plane before blowing it up. 8-Ball tells the passengers that if anyone tries to stop them, a toxic nerve gas will be released from several booby traps. We find out, however, that this is simply a scare tactic, as when Nadia walks past the trap, nothing happens. She reunites with Elias and heads to the cockpit and realizes that the pilot is dead. She needs to get the plane turned back around and enlist the help of Mohammed, who has flight experience. Farid realizes that he and Mohammed were set up. The hijackers baited them by inviting them to a fake science convention in New York to use them as scapegoats and make them appear as the terrorists. Another passenger named Bill revealed that the terrorists are trying to influence the stock market and cause a crash by blowing up the plane over London. The terrorists themselves never admit to this, but this is supported by the news broadcast from the beginning of the film, which spoke about the airline stock prices surging. The hijackers head to the cargo hold and discover Yuri's dead body and initially think that a pit bull may have killed him. However, 8-Ball discovers that Nadia is still alive and they head to the cockpit to retrieve her. Berg orders her to open the door and kills a passenger when she refuses. He says that he will keep killing passengers until she opens the door. They attempt to force her hand by threatening to shoot a young girl. Nadia opens the door and saves the girl by taking a huge bite out of Berg's neck. The rest of the group run off terrified except for 8-Ball, who appears fascinated by what he sees. We see that Berg is now infected and starts transitioning into a vampire, but Nadia quickly stops him by stabbing his heart with a knife. In a pretty sad scene, we see that the little girl who she just rescued is terrified of her. This is understandable, as all she can see is a blood-sucking monster that just killed someone and doesn't realize that Nadia saved her life. We see that she even scared her own son, and she tells him to keep the cockpit door locked so he can remain safe. Nadia is just as terrified as everyone else by her transformation, which is why she is so determined to find a cure. She goes into the bathroom and injects herself once more with the medication. We see another flashback of Nadia right after becoming infected. She becomes terrified of what she has become and tries to tear out her newly formed fangs with pliers. She returns to the abandoned house searching for answers and meets the father of the vampire who infected her. We see several scientific texts and instruments in the basement showing that he was probably searching for a cure. He whips out a boomstick and starts blasting at Nadia. The elder vampire says that the evil is uncontrollable and that they must not allow it to keep spreading. She rushes and tackles him to the ground and proceeds to bash his head in with his own crutch. She then steals his supply of medicine from his fridge and sets the house on fire. If you showed me this scene without prior context, I think she was burning down a meth lab after a drug deal gone wrong. Back on the plane, 8-Ball gets a hold of Nadia's diary and and realizing that she is a vampire, arms himself with a UV flashlight and a wooden stake. Elias attempts to drag his mom into the cockpit, but the terrorists return and attack Nadia. 8-Ball uses the UV flashlight to incapacitate her while the rest of the group try to regain the cockpit. 8-Ball proceeds to grab a syringe and draws out some of Nadia's blood. He then goes to stab her with the stake, but stops when Elias points a gun at him. He tries to grab the gun out of his hand, but it goes off and shoots through a window, which causes the air pressure to drop drastically throughout the plane. Everyone on the plane begins to struggle for oxygen, and douchebag Bill steals an oxygen mask from a grandma to save himself. Nadia grabs a gun and points it at 8-Ball, but vampirism doesn't improve marksmanship skills. In the cockpit, Mohammed doesn't reach his oxygen mask in time and dies, which allows the hijackers inside. They manage to lower the plane and get pressure levels back to normal. This also causes a food cart to roll across the aisle and hilariously crash right into Bill. Moral of the story, don't steal oxygen from grandmas. Nadia goes searching for 8-Ball and finds him in the cargo hold inside of a car. She tries shooting him, but the windshield is bulletproof and he's locked himself inside. She makes a hole in the windshield with a metal rod, but he snatches it away from her. He then takes out the syringe and begins injecting himself with her blood. He quickly begins transitioning into a vampire, but Nadia proceeds to burn him alive while he has no control over his body. In the cockpit, the alarm alerts the terrorists of the fire in the cargo hold, and Bastian quickly puts it out. They head to the cargo hold and Carl shoots Nadia in the foot. This causes her to scream, which scares all the other passengers and causes them to panic. They all rush toward the front of the plane to get away from her, and poor old Grandma Engelor gets trampled by the group in the process. They realize 8-Ball is still alive, and when Curtis goes to check on him, he proceeds to take a huge chunk out of his neck. 8-Ball gets out of the car, and we see that he has fully transitioned into a vampire. Carl and Bastian try to run away, but only Bastian makes it to the surface. 8-Ball kills Carl by slashing his throat and then lets Curtis feed on his blood, who is now also a vampire. The passengers arm themselves and go after Nadia like an angry mob. Engelor is found dead by her husband Rainer, who believes Nadia is responsible. He grabs a gun and attempts to rush her, which angers her into biting him. She is then restrained by another passenger but gets free and goes after Farid, who is holding an axe. The other passenger is about to shoot her, but Elias begs him not to. Nadia hears vampire 8-Ball and Curtis from the cargo hold and rushes off to block all the doors. Farid tries to help her but gets bit by 8-Ball in the process. To stop the infection from spreading, Nadia amputates Farid's hand with the axe. She rushes over to the other end of the plane and kills vampire Curtis, who tries making his way up. We see that Rainer has now turned into a vampire and tries to bite an injured Bill, but Nadia quickly kills him. Bill has a huge injury to his abdomen and they enlist the help of a doctor to treat him. Nadia tells Bastian to turn the plane around for New York, but he tells her that they don't have enough fuel and they need to land at the nearest airfield. The doctor says that Bill has a kidney rupture and that he is in critical condition. Not wanting to die, he opens the door and frees 8-Ball and asks him to turn him into a vampire. 8-Ball begins attacking all of the passengers and turning them all into vampires. Nadia fears that if they land the plane, the group of vampires will be unleashed, which will cause it to spread uncontrollably. They come up with a plan to land the plane and blow it up as soon as the remaining uninfected get off the plane safely. With the help of the UV flashlight to protect him, Elias crawls his way up to the cargo hold to retrieve the remote detonator inside of Curtis's pocket. He successfully retrieves the remote, but the vampires are too large in numbers and now have Elias surrounded underneath the car. Nadia tells Farid that he will have to land the plane and makes him promise to take care of her son. She then kills Bastian and drinks his blood to give her enough power to fight off the rest of the vampires and save Elias. She heads to the cargo hold and gets into a brutal fight with 8-Ball. 8-Ball is too strong and overpowers Nadia and begins to drink her blood. Elias uses himself as bait to get 8-Ball off of his mother. He lures him and uses the detonator to blow up a nearby explosive, which disorients him, and Nadia pushes him off the plane. 8-Ball manages to hang on and climbs his way back into the cargo hold. Farid watches the events from the cockpit and decides to turn the plane in the direction of the sun, finally killing 8-Ball. To keep his mother from dying, Elias slices his hand and feeds Nadia his blood. This resuscitates Nadia, but knowing that her urge and bloodthirst will soon become uncontrollable, she pushes Elias away from her and retreats into the cargo hold. We are now back in the present day after Transatlantic Flight 473 has successfully landed on the military airfield. Elias asks about Farid, but he is told that the police will take him into custody. He tries to tell them that Farid is innocent, but they sedate him thinking he is in shock. Colonel Drummond is convinced that Farid is the terrorist leader and orders him to release the hostages. Realizing that he won't be able to convince them he's innocent, he jumps out of the pilot's chair down into the lower levels, nearly avoiding several sniper shots. An extraction team then rushes over and make entry onto the plane, unaware of the real danger that awaits them. They manage to extract Farid off the plane and drive him away. He attempts to warn them about the dangers on board, but they refuse to listen to him. Elias is being driven away in an ambulance, but he manages to escape and runs towards the plane to look for Farid, unaware that he is already off the plane. Inside of the plane, the military are being picked off one by the vampires. Elias makes it to the plane and sees his own mother, nearly unrecognizable as a fully turned vampire. Unable to control herself and not recognizing her son, she rushes toward Elias, who takes the detonator out of his teddy bear and blows up the entire plane. It's also possible that Nadia did recognize Elias and that she chose to charge at him to force him into blowing up the plane, knowing there was no other option. We see her engulfed in the flame, but it is never actually confirmed if she dies or not, as she wasn't in the immediate blast radius. In the film's final scene, Colonel Drummond orders them to uncuff Farid, which is hilarious because his hand was already chopped off, so he could have possibly just slid his hand right out. Farid and Elias embrace in front of the flames and wreckage as the movie ends. And that, ladies and gentlemen, was Blood Red Sky. My friends, this was a pretty darn good vampire flick if you ask me. Netflix has been really killing it with their original horror films lately, and I am absolutely loving it. I feel like this was a pretty fresh take on the vampire genre that had a really engaging and heartfelt story. I definitely recommend this film to any horror fan, especially those who love the vampire genre. My friends, as always, I hope you all enjoyed the video, and if you did, I would appreciate if you could leave a like on this video. Thank you all for tuning in, and I cannot wait to see y'all right back here in the horror mine. Y'all stick around.